Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you here today. So last week we had a visiting speaker, Sustama. I think many of you were here for that. If you weren't, it is available. The talk is available on our website. Um, so uh, I hope you can look it up. It was an excellent presentation with a good discussion to follow. So today we'll return to the Eightfold Path. We've been studying the early teachings in Buddhism, just going back to the Four Noble Truths. And the fourth noble truth, of course, is the Eightfold Path. And we've talked about right view, right intention. Those are considered the wisdom part of the Eightfold Path. And now we're getting into what is termed the morality portion of, or the ethical portion of the Eightfold Path, which is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So we'll talk about right speech today, sama vaka. Vaka, by the way, comes from the same Indo-European root as voice or vocal or vocation, as in calling. Samavaka. Sama, usually translated as right, but it could be translated as skillful or appropriate. So right speech. So why is right speech the first one? Why does it have such a prominent position when we're talking about morality? Speech occupies kind of a strange place in the boundary between thought and action. It's not it's more than thought, but it's not quite action. It's somewhere in between. But I think the Buddha recognized the power of speech and wanted us to be aware of the very significant importance of speech. One of the earliest teachings to his son was about not lying, never lie, always tell the truth. So right speech has a very prominent position in the teachings. Um, Speech is powerful. I guess I would like to demonstrate that by putting up two iconic images that you'll recognize immediately, and let you just ponder them for a moment or two, each one, thinking about the power of speech, power of language, and seeing what emotional flavor these images have, and what comes up, what's aroused in you when you view these images. So we'll start with the first one. and then consider the second one. So the Eihei Dogen, the founder of the Soto Zen sect of Buddhism in Japan, was well aware of the power of speech. And in one of his writings, entitled The Four Methods of Guidance for the Bodhisattva, for the person trying to sort of be of benefit in the world, person trying to, as it is said, save all beings. The second one listed out of the four guidances is kind speech, and I'll read you just a couple excerpts from that short section. Kind speech, he says, means that when you see sentient beings, you arouse the mind of compassion and offer words of loving care. It is contrary to cruel or violent speech. He goes on, praise those with virtue, pity those without it. If kind speech is offered, little by little, virtue will grow. And he concludes, you should know that kind speech arises from kind mind, and kind mind from the seed of compassionate mind. You should ponder the fact that kind speech is not just praising the merit of others, it has the power to turn the destiny of the nation. So there's wide agreement about the power of speech. But let's get back then to the early Buddhist teachings, those found in the Pali Canon, the suttas in the Pali Canon. And how is the Buddha said to have talked about speech? In particular, how does he define right speech? There's a fairly short definition. And what is right speech? Abstaining from lying, from divisive speech, from abusive speech, and from idle chatter. This is called right speech. But the Buddha comes back to this topic of speech again and again. And in another sutta, he talks about right speech having 5 elements. Monks, he says, a statement endowed with 5 factors is well spoken, not ill spoken. It is blameless and unfaulted by the wise. Which 5? It is spoken at the right time. It is spoken in truth. It is spoken affectionately. It is spoken beneficially. And it is spoken with a mind of goodwill. So I find those 5 things useful to remember. And, a lot of our speech just sort of falls out, and we don't think that much about it in advance. But sometimes we are in situations where we perceive the need to say something, and we're wondering how to do it, or if we should do it, or that sort of thing. And just remembering these 5 factors, I think, can be helpful. So I've sort of developed my own mnemonic. If I can find it again, here we are. TTKGB. Is it true? Is it timely? Is it kindly spoken? Is it spoken with goodwill? Is it beneficial? So a lot of our speech, doesn't require a lot of forethought. It just is. It's okay as it is. We don't need to be afraid to say anything. But again, at times it's helpful to reflect upon what we're saying or what we have said. Maybe looking at this after the fact and saying, well, was that true? Was it timely? Was it kindly spoken? Was it spoken with goodwill, and was it beneficial? That's all well and good, but it sometimes it's hard to separate the true from the untrue. Lots of times where there's a certain amount of uncertainty there. And timeliness is tricky. When is it timely? Is it kindly spoken? Sometimes, we can delude ourselves about such things. We can think that maybe we're speaking kindly, but there's a certain edge to it that is perceived by the person we're talking to. And is it spoken with goodwill? Are we really, really wanting what is best for the other when we speak? And will it be beneficial? Lots of times hard to know. So these are guidelines. They're helpful. They don't solve the problem of speech. Nothing can, but it gives us something to work with. There was a interesting segment on the radio, I think yesterday or the day before, about and one of the the topic was about how people hear things differently. That we all have our unique brains and unique apparatus of hearing, and some people hear things. Of course, obviously, it can not only be an effect of the brain, but also it's an effect of training. If you have a musician, they'll hear things that most of us would not hear. And one of the topics used, one of the not topics, but one of the phrases used was, or the words used was the concept of neurodiversity, which neurodiversity is a word that was coined by Judy Singer in the late 20th century, 1990s, a sociologist from Australia, and she was trying to understand her situation. Her mother was autistic, and she felt like she was on the spectrum as well. And then her daughter also was diagnosed with autism. So she was very interested in how the mind that we refer to as autistic differs from what is called normal. and arrived at this concept of, well, there are different ways, and what we call normal is kind of an elusive concept, and that there is diversity out there among minds. In fact, everyone's mind is, in a way, unique. Our brains are unique, our experiences are unique. We have unique ways of perceiving things. And this adds to the challenge of right speech. At many years ago, I was a friend of a philosophy graduate student at WashU, and he was from Germany. And when he first arrived from Germany, he was very fluent in written English. He had read, the English philosophers, and probably could read them with much greater facility than I could, being a native English speaker. But he really didn't know the first thing about conversational English. He just hadn't used it. And the first week or so he was here, people would come. He would be in the office where all the graduate students sort of worked and met. And someone would say to him, well, how are you? How are you? And he would think that they were asking him, what are you doing? And he would say, I'm reading a book. So he quickly developed a reputation of being aloof. But he worked through that, and in a relatively short period of time understood that this was just the way we spoke with one another in English, that the expected response was, I'm fine, how are you? Or something else. But sometimes based on people's brain structure or or set of experiences, something we say in all innocence turns out to be offensive. So it's a learning process. It's an iterative process, learning about right speech. And then there are awkward situations where you might have to talk to someone about something that they don't want to hear. And there is actually a sutta that addresses this issue. And the backstory for the sutta, it's probably too long to go into, but there's a prince who is basically trying to trap the Buddha in contradicting himself, in a contradiction. But he's wanting to ask about whether if it's ever appropriate, if it's ever right speech to say something that the other person perceives as unpleasant or unwanted. I'll just read a section of this. The backstory is not all that important, but the point is what I'll be reading. Then, after night had passed, the Blessed One, early in the morning, put on his robes, and carrying his bowl and outer robe, went to Prince Abaya's home. That's the prince we're talking about. And on arrival, he sat down on a seat made ready. Prince Abaya, with his own hand, served and satisfied the Blessed One with fine staple and non-staple foods. Then, when the Blessed One, referring to the Buddha, had eaten and had removed his hand from his bowl, Prince Abaya took a lower seat and sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, Would the Tathagata, referring to the Buddha, would the Tathagata say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others? The Buddha responded, Prince, there is no categorical yes or no answer to that. And the Buddha gives an example of how there may be situations where saying something that is unendearing and disagreeable to the listener is appropriate. At that time, a baby boy was lying face up on the prince's lap. So the Blessed One said to the prince, What do you think, prince? If this young boy, through your own negligence or through that of a nurse, were to take a stick or a piece of gravel into its mouth, what would you do? I would take it out. If I couldn't get it out right away, then holding its head in my left hand and crooking a finger of my right, I would take it out, even if it meant drawing blood. Why is that? Because I have sympathy for the young boy. Well, in the same way, Prince, in the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, unendearing, and disagreeable to others, he does not say them. And in the case, and there are 6 items here, so bear with me. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, unendearing, and disagreeable to others, he does not say them. But in the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, but unendearing and disagreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time for saying them. And in the sense of the words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say them. And in the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say them. But in the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, and endearing and agreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time for saying them. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has sympathy for living beings. So if it was hard to follow that, basically the criteria for saying things that are disagreeable or unendearing involves their being true, beneficial, and timely. So right speech. Of course, like anything else, it gets more complicated the more you think about it. But I think questions that come up that I've considered in the past anyway are what is idle chatter? Is just small talk idle chatter? Is gossip idle chatter? What is idle chatter? And the Buddha indicated that there's different standards for monks and lay people there. So that's something to think about. And another thing to think about is whether it's really possible to master right speech. or if we're all just essentially doomed to fail at times. And what is the right time to say things that the listener doesn't want to hear? What is it to be timely in that respect? So I think I'll stop there. And sorry, I shared that screen for too long, but and we'll be breaking up into smaller groups for some discussion before we get back together in a few moments.